The sun had already begun its descent when Jack Callahan crested the ridge, dust curling in his wake. His horse, lean and steady, carried him over the barren ground like a shadow of the man who once had a name known in town. Jack was a loner, not by choice but by necessity. The saloons, the railroads, even the sheriff's offices all had long since forgotten him. What remained was the ranch, the horse, and a hunger gnawing at his insides sharper than any outlaw's knife. As he reached the creek, Jack spotted a young man, barely more than a boy, collapsed against the bank. His clothes were rags, hands bloody from trying to catch fish with no net. Hunger painted every line of his face. Jack dismounted slowly, wary of traps and deception, but when he saw the desperation in the boy's eyes, hesitation fell away. From his saddlebag, he drew out a small piece of bread, crusty and dry. The boy's eyes widened, disbelief fighting with shame, as Jack broke the bread in half and handed it over. You're giving it to me?" the boy whispered, voice barely audible. Jack nodded. "Ain't mine anymore." That simple act forged a bond that would ripple far beyond the creek's banks. The boy, whose name was Eli, ate greedily, trembling as he swallowed, while Jack watched the shadows stretch across the plains. Little did either of them know, their moment of shared humanity had been observed. From behind a ridge, a band of hardened outlaws noted the man who fed a stranger, and they saw not weakness, but courage. By nightfall, Jack and Eli had built a small fire. The boy learned quickly that survival was a language of its own. Jack spoke sparingly but wisely, teaching him to read the land, which plants could heal, which tracks meant predators were near, and how to move silently through the darkness. Trust grew like roots in dry soil, slow but unbreakable. And as the stars emerged, Eli told the story of his past, a home burned, family scattered, a life he'd been running from. Jack didn't offer answers. He offered companionship, and that was enough. Days turned into nights, and the bond hardened into loyalty. They hunted together, shared what little they could find, and always watched each other's backs. Word, however, traveled fast in those parts. Nearby towns whispered about Jack Callahan, the loner who'd saved a boy from starvation. Some called it foolish, others reckless. But soon, the whispers reached ears that had long been plotting Jack's downfall. Enemies, once divided, found a reason to ride together not for vengeance, but for allegiance to the principle that a man who could show mercy could be a man worth following. It happened one dusky evening. 6 riders approached, dust swirling at their horses' hooves. Jack sensed them long before he saw them, the subtle shift of the wind carrying danger. Guns were drawn, but he made no move. Eli trembled behind him, clutching a stick like a weapon. The riders came to a halt, eyes scanning the firelight. One stepped forward, a woman with a scar across her cheek, hard as stone but with eyes that hinted at a buried kindness. "Jack Callahan," she said, voice steady. "You fed a stranger in the desert. That choice, it matters." Jack didn't understand at first. "What do you mean?" "Enemies ride as one when honor is shown," she replied. Around her, the others lowered their weapons slightly, not out of submission, but respect. In that instant, Jack realized that the world, lawless and cruel as it was, still had rules, unwritten codes of loyalty that even enemies could recognize. By the fire's end, the riders had shared their stories, their reasons for pursuit, their grudges, and by dawn, what had started as potential bloodshed had transformed into an alliance. A fragile one, yes, but an alliance nonetheless. And in the middle of it all, Jack understood a truth he'd never known. Kindness, even in small doses, could bind hearts stronger than fear or gold. Jacob Callahan had always been a man who lived quietly, tucked away on the far edge of the frontier. His ranch was nothing grand, a weathered house, a leaning barn, and acres of dry grassland where his cattle grazed under the endless sky. He wasn't known for wealth or for kin, but for a stubbornness that kept him rooted to land most others had abandoned. The frontier had a way of breaking men, but Jacob had endured, though at a cost. Nights were lonely, and days stretched long, filled only by the sounds of cattle, wind, and his own thoughts. It was hunger that first brought the boy to him. That morning, Jacob had risen early, the way he always did, and saddled his horse to check the outer fence lines. The sun was just beginning to bleed across the horizon when he saw a figure stumbling near the creek bed. At first, he thought it was a wild dog, some stray coyote driven close to the ranch in search of scraps. But as he drew nearer, the truth hit him like a blow. It was a child. The boy could not have been more than 10. His skin stretched thin over bones, his hair matted with dust, his bare feet raw and bleeding from miles of walking. He collapsed at the sight of Jacob, too weak even to run, too far gone to fight. The boy's lips moved, whispering words Jacob couldn't understand, the syllables of a language foreign to his ears. But the desperation in his eyes needed no translation. Jacob dismounted slowly, every instinct torn between caution and compassion. The frontier was not a place where men extended mercy without consequence. He knew the stories of white settlers who found themselves at the end of arrows after offering food to the wrong stranger, of tribes who saw charity as weakness. Still, as he looked down at the child sprawled in the dirt, ribs heaving with every shallow breath, Jacob's heart twisted in his chest. He could not leave him there. With a grunt, he lifted the boy into his arms. The child was feather light, barely more than a sack of bones wrapped in tattered cloth. Jacob carried him back to the ranch, each step heavy with the weight of a decision he knew might haunt him. By the time they reached the house, the boy's head lolled against Jacob's shoulder, his breath shallow but steady. Jacob laid him gently on the wooden floor and fetched water, wetting the boy's cracked lips until he managed to swallow. From the pantry, Jacob tore off a piece of stale bread and softened it with broth. The boy ate in small, desperate bites, as though afraid the food might vanish if he lingered too long. The next days saw Jack and his unlikely allies riding together through the plains. They had no common cause beyond loyalty to an idea, the idea that a man's honor could not be measured by wealth or violence alone. Eli stayed close, learning how to hold a gun, how to read the horizon, and how to trust people who had every reason to mistrust him. Tensions ran high. The riders had been enemies once. Suspicion was natural. Yet each evening, they'd sit around the fire, sharing sparse meals, exchanging glances that slowly shifted from doubt to respect. Jack watched them, noting every twitch, every unspoken fear, and realized that the same act that had saved Eli's life was saving these men's souls as well. One afternoon, the group reached a narrow canyon. Ambushes were frequent here. Jack, instinctively cautious, dismounted and sent Eli ahead with messages for scouts. The canyon echoed with the creaking of leather, the whinny of horses, the tension of drawn guns. Suddenly, a shot rang out. A man fell, a rider unprepared for Jack's careful reconnaissance. Chaos threatened, but Jack moved with the precision of someone who had survived worse. He directed his allies, shielding Eli, guiding their return to safety. After the ambush, quiet returned. The riders, once suspicious and hostile, now looked at Jack differently. They weren't just following a man who shared bread, they were following someone who could protect them, who could act without hesitation, who understood that loyalty meant more than contracts or fear. Nights became lessons, firesides became councils. Eli grew taller, stronger, learning the unspoken code of survival and honor. And through it all, Jack never once claimed leadership. He only acted when needed, never flaunting courage, never seeking reward. And that humility, more than his skill with a gun, bound the men to him. The landscape shifted, rivers and rocks marking their journey. They crossed paths with hostile townsfolk, rustlers, and natural dangers alike. Every time, the men who had once been enemies now rode shoulder to shoulder, trusting Jack's judgment implicitly. The boy who had once been starving at a creek had become a symbol proof that mercy and compassion could alter destinies. And then came the night the storm hit. Thunder cracked like rifles across the plains, lightning illuminating the riders' tense faces. Horses reared, mud and water mixing with sweat and blood. In the midst of it, Eli stumbled, the torrential rain threatening to sweep him away. Jack plunged into the torrent, pulling the boy to safety. The riders, seeing the lengths Jack would go to protect even a child, understood fully the bond forged at that small creek weeks before. They had chosen to defend not just a man, but a principle. By dawn, the storm had passed, and the group huddled together, wet and exhausted, yet unbroken. In silence, they rode onward, their numbers small, their trust unspoken yet absolute. And Jack, who had once believed himself alone in the world, realized that a single act of sharing, one simple loaf of bread, had created a force stronger than any enemy. The final confrontation came at the old fort on the ridge, a ruined outpost where enemies had holed up for decades. Jack and his riders approached cautiously, every sense alert. Eli rode beside him, no longer trembling, his eyes sharp, hands steady. The others had fallen into place naturally, each understanding their role, their loyalty, their honor. The outlaws inside thought they had the advantage. They didn't understand the bonds forged outside the canyon, over fires and shared hardships. One by one, Jack's group moved silently, cutting off escape routes, positioning themselves strategically. When the first gunshot rang, it was precise, deliberate, and the ambush was over before it had begun. Jack led from the shadows, his voice calm but commanding. "No one moves until I say," he whispered. The outlaws, realizing they were outmaneuvered by a man they'd once sought to kill, surrendered quickly. And as Jack stood in the aftermath, rain-drenched and exhausted, he realized the truth. It wasn't his skill with a gun that had saved them, nor sheer luck, but the choice to give, to protect, to act with honor when no one else would. Eli ran forward, clapping him on the shoulder, and Jack allowed himself a rare smile. The riders who had once been enemies now rode together, a force united by the simplest of acts, sharing the last meal. In the quiet aftermath, as the sun broke through clouds, Jack understood that the plains had not changed him, he had changed them. Together, they rode back to the creek where it had all begun, the bond between them unspoken but unbreakable. Eli carried the firewood. The men laughed quietly, sharing stories of survival, fear, and courage. Jack looked at them, eyes scanning the horizon, and realized that even in a lawless world, trust and loyalty were currencies more valuable than gold. If you've ever felt alone, remember Jack's story. One small act of kindness, a shared meal, a helping hand, a moment of trust can ripple through the world in ways you never imagine. Stand for what's right. Protect those who cannot protect themselves. And never underestimate the power of compassion.